Live.
The People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. Why must a country's citizens care about the budget, about its implications, its nuances and impacts? Let's find out by speaking to our guest. Tonight's guest is policy analyst Dr. Sujata Gamage. Good evening and welcome, Dr. Gamage.
Good evening.
First up, my question to you is, why is there so much buzz around the budget each year? Shouldn't this be just another regular task of any government?
Absolutely. But I think we have a history of in the Commonwealth tradition, we have this throne speech. Of course, throne speech is when you open the parliament, but we used to have the finance minister walking in with this this black bag, and there people would wait with a bated breath because the tax changes would come at that time, and people would hoard the goods, and because if the taxes increase, then if prices are increased, the bread price would increase the next day. It used to be that way, but it's not anymore. Actually, this budget is very good in that there are no tax shocks, because a budget, if you're in a developed country, the budget, there should not be any shocks in the budget, because this is about really government looking at its expenses, looking at its income, and actually managing its expenses according to income. That's as simple as that. And there should not be tax changes. There should be tax policy, and there should not be so surprises. Raises for government servants, there should be some sort of a formula for raising that. But people have come to expect this of the government, that there'll be this goodies, and interesting. So the governments are delivering, but you'll find that they're delivering in a very smart way. It's just, if you look at the goodies that are advertised in these newspapers, it's only 5% of the budget. You wouldn't know that. The whole newspaper is dedicated to that. So the governments are also playing along and giving you some goodies, but I think gradually it's got to stop, and it should be a more technical affair that's done by government, round tables. Even in the parliament, it's become a show. It's become a little theatre. It's really should not be that way, because particularly for Sri Lanka at this time, we have so little leeway. We have to balance our expenses against our income. We can't print money anymore. Those are conditions, because we default and we can't borrow anymore. So we have so little leeway, and there's not so much to make such a song and dance about. So yes, how the revenues are calculated, because these are estimates. Tax money you can project, but you can fall short. You can have more, but you're more likely to fall short. So those issues you can discuss, but there's really all this song and dance is really not necessary.
You mentioned tax shocks. The tax shocks came way before the budget proposals.
Exactly. Yeah.
Also, we have this notion of looking at a budget as something that gives us handouts, which is the wrong way of going about it. Speak to us about creating this attitudinal shift.
Take the cartoons, Punchi Sinyo. I think it's time to put away that bag, empty malla. I mean, doesn't it have anything to do with this Punchi Sinyo cartoon? Lanka has this, I don't know whether you see that, he always carries this empty bag. He's in tatters, his clothes are in tatters, and does he do anything but to looking for goodies from government? So I think even the cartoonists have to change change their attitudes about this. And goodies, interesting. So government does deliver goodies. Most of the time it is what's already been done, but it's give a top up. For example, take the that is called it's a Dimanav, it's a allowance for government servants, 10,000 rupees. I mean, actually there's some justification for that because they have not received a pay raise for quite a while. So there should be some gradual pay raises which should be built into the system.
Yeah, it can't be arbitrary.
But that's, so I think it'll, for example, take fuel prices. Now we've finally come to a formula for fuel prices, right? So like that, we need to have formula for increasing government servants' page. And of course the government should be able to at some point and say we can't give raises this year, but at least it doesn't need to be some big budget statement. So lots of these items are really, for one, as I said, the total expenditure not counting interest, right, is 4.3, and all these goodies only come to 200 billion, which is about 5%. Okay, so each government does that. They play along, just give a little bit but make a big fuss, so people think, okay, we are getting things from the government.
Sorry, what's the figure again?
Figure is, so all these, all these proposals, they are called expenditure proposals. In October, the government does what's called appropriation bill. That is the boring part, but that's a big part, where we give out all the heads, that is all the votes for each department. See, we have about 100 plus departments. We have 300 plus statutory bodies. We have private enterprises which actually are not government enterprises, which actually receive government funding, right? We know that Lanka, all these people, all these enterprises are propped up by the government. So we have about 625 of those, and if you count the divisional secretariats, which 300 plus, there are about 1,000 entities. So there are line items giving how much each gets. That bill comes in October because the government has to function. They have to, all these have to be debated and they have to be sorted. So that's 95% of the budget. So what's announced in December is some top-ups. Right, so these are called expenditure proposals. So that's what people are looking for, but they are actually only very small part of the budget. The boring part is already done, and we are not talking about that. So I like to address how we talk about the boring part, and really, that's what we should be interested in.
Before moving to Budget 2024, can we speak a bit about how we have fared with respect to Budget 2023? What are the promises that have predominantly been left undelivered?
So the executive is present in the budget. So the parliament, when they critique, they should have support. They can't get the executive's analysis. So we have Office of Budget Management. Hopefully they will analyze it next time. But I think it should be a government's job, particularly the parliament's job. So the parliament is going to have Office of Budget Management, which is a big improvement. They will look at this, and they will, before the budget debate, they will come up with this analysis. So next year, probably the government will have to be more careful and have some answers ready. Why some things were not done last year? No, actually we don't. And also, more importantly, as I said, only 5% goes for all these additional proposals. What about the other 95%? How did each, every year these departments, statutory bodies, they get their allocation. Where's the accountability? Right? So, for example, in 2019, there was a new trend was started, but then it discontinued. That is, they put a performance measure for each ministry. For example, Minister of Justice. Very interesting performance measure. What is the rate of resolving cases? We know cases go on for 10-15 years. So I think it's amazing performance measure. So we should actually, I'm hoping the Office of Budget Management will have these performance measures, and the budget will have this performance measure. So Justice Ministry gets this much money. What did you do with it? Right? How many cases were resolved, and what time did it take? Right? And the prison population, all that. So I think we need to, just the 22, where it has been doing again is that icing part. The budget has the cake and the icing. The icing is what I say goes in and the icing is only 5% of the budget. So we should be looking at the 95% of the budget, and it's too much for independent research organizations to. The government itself should be doing, not the executive, which is spending the money, but the parliament, which has the oversight. So Parliamentary Budget Office is going to be very critical. Right?
All right. Veritas Dr. Nishant Dimel has said that the budget is a fairy tale as the revenue projections are not grounded in reality. Over the past 23 years, budgets have consistently fallen short of meeting the set revenue targets. Dr. Gamage, what is your feedback on the expenditure part of the budget?
Right. Now, to comment on the revenue part, it's always a story, right? Revenue projections are stories. So whether it's a fairy tale, how realistic, I think there are a lot of criticisms, but I'm not in a position to answer that. Let's take it as a given. The government has serious intentions of raising this revenue. They have to expand the tax net, all that they have to do. Let's say they're serious, and they have the expenditure side, as I said. So the expenditure side, the government has two parts. You have the primary budget, so to speak, where you take away the interest payment. You don't consider that. You consider only all expenses except interest payment. Ordinary people can't do that. No, when you get a $100,000 rupee paycheck, your interest payment is already taken off by the time you get that. But the government has this special ability to actually borrow more money to pay your interest. So the interest payment is always as a separate item, and then you have what's called financing to pay. If you go to a bank and say, I can't afford to pay 30,000 in loan repayments, can I borrow more to pay that? The bank says, no way, give me more collateral and then I'll do that. But the governments can do that, for good reasons, because if governments go bankrupt, countries go bankrupt. So because of that, let's look at the expenditures. Is 4,327 expenditure they predict and 4,127 in revenue. So actually we are just, on paper at least, balancing our revenue with expenditure. That's called a primary deficit. Our primary deficit is just now only small amount, 200 billion. That's IMF requirement. Actually IMF doesn't have to tell us that. We should have been doing that, right? So of that, as I said, the expenditure, there are all the institutions, nearly 1,000 government institutions, for the services they provide and to pay the salaries, 95% is for that, right? 95%. So 5% is what's given out is in these various goodies for people. So that's, but the 5% we pay attention, did the government promise on those, but we don't pay attention on the 95%, which is all these institutions, nearly 1,000 if you don't count the divisional secretariat divisions. There's about 600 plus institutions. How do they perform? I think that's something we need to ask without getting swamped with these goodies.
Professionals are bearing the brunt of income tax. It is incumbent that the government increases the tax net, ensures that those who abscond or evade taxes are caught, and the government also has to ensure better tax administration through its various departments, the Inland Revenue Department, etc. How must this be properly managed, because this aspect has been mismanaged in the past, resulting largely in what we are going through right now?
Yeah, I didn't see any special measures that the government is talking about, but it's shown in the numbers. See, we cannot print money. There is, the new Central Bank Act, according to that we cannot print money. There are some loopholes, but we cannot print money to fix the budget deficits, and we cannot borrow. So the government has to collect this money, and election years come in, and you have to show this. So I think we have to assume that the government plans to widen the tax net. Of course the professionals, you can't increase their tax anymore. The VAT is increased, which is really the easiest and the way to get that.
But isn't that the laziest way also?
Yeah, but you can't plan, you can't budget with saying, okay, we plan to increase the tax net. You need something concrete. So, and also I think some people would argue that VAT can be that much, and the income tax can be lower. Some people say income tax higher and that's lower, but those are debatable things. But no, government needs something concrete. You can't put here the numbers saying, we plan to increase the tax net, we are going to make the IRD more efficient. No, you need something concrete to govern the country. So
the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, which is one of the key stakeholders in this enterprise, has said that pragmatic implementation is key, and that the macroeconomic mismanagement has to be now avoided.
Absolutely, it's all about macroeconomics. I mean, this expenditure, of course, I think there are lots of reforms on the agenda, and maybe this expenditure we might actually end up with less expenditure, but I think at this stage of in an economic crisis, macroeconomics is everything, right? So you can't say we'll reduce corruption, we will make government institutions more efficient. All these are needed, but macroeconomics is the most important tools we can use. Absolutely. So how much we plan to earn, how much we plan to spend, but if the macroeconomics are not right, if the people are not able to run their businesses, have some stability, then we won't be getting this tax.
Dr. Gamage, there is no proper nexus between the budget, then the budget implementing agencies being held accountable for proper management.
Yes.
How do you view this?
Absolutely. The budget implementing, all these translate into now this 4.3 trillion expenditure by the government. All this gets translated into votes. One is the Minister of Education gets, Minister of Finance, all this go into these ministries. So once they go there, what they achieve with that, we have never considered that. As I said briefly, there were these performance measures, and we have different kind of budgets. What we have is what's called incremental budget. How much did you get last year? How much more you are going to get? So it's based on what you got last year. This is what's practiced mostly. It's a lazy way of budgeting. It's incremental. There are two other budgets. One is called zero base.
Okay.
There you say, okay, start with zero. Your budget is zero. Now tell us what you need for next year. So the Minister of Education is giving 400 billion. That's not directly. 200 some odd goes to the ministry, and the other goes to the provincial council. Let's say 250,000 billion the Minister of Education gets. But you said next year it's zero. Tell us what you need, what you're hoping to achieve. That is actually very theoretical. Not many countries practice that. But then what you have is performance budgeting. That is, you have a basic amount that you get, but the rest is based on performance. So I think that's where we should be going. Some parts of the budget at least based on performance, and we need performance criteria. Agriculture, how much did we increase our agriculture exports? That's a very simple indicator. So that will get straight really. So as you very correctly said, no, there's no mechanism to follow up.
Dr. Gamage, you have worked extensively in the area of education. Speak to us about how satisfied we can be with the budgetary allocation for education in repeated budgets.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always held the position that we really need to use what we have more efficiently. So I'm not one of those who will go for 6% of the GDP for education, because actually that really does not make any sense. Our income is about 12% of the GDP. Our expenditure is about 22% of the GDP. So if our income is about 12% of the GDP, how do we give 6% of the GDP? It's about of the government expenditure. Yes, 6%. We are not there. I think it is about between 3 and 4%. But I think I would go for more efficiency in the system before we ask for more increases, especially decentralization. Actually education is a devolved subject. So I think education reforms proposed education reforms go for a big way on giving autonomy to provincial and local institutions. So hopefully we will see more efficiencies. So I would say I would say that let's keep the education allocation at that, and let's see more efficiency. Let's give some more performance measures and then increase.
Over the past few years, we've seen large numbers of academics and other stakeholders in the education sphere advocating for higher allocation towards the education budget. So you're saying that's not the issue?
Actually, there is a problem with it, because that's they are the more vociferous. They have voice, the higher education lobby. But actually, over the years, we looked at the numbers. Let me step back. In 2003, in an analysis, extensive analysis World Bank did, and they published it as Towers of Strength, big document, and they found that as a percent of money going into higher education, we are spending more on higher education than on general education, right? If you take the whole education budget, the component going into higher education is more, and it's been increasing. Why is that? Because we have very strong, vociferous higher education lobby. So I think what's been happening is we have so much argument against privatization of higher education. You know what's been happening? School education has been privatized under the radar. Every parent has to spend some money on tuition.
Yeah.
So I think universities could use more money, of course, but I think we need to prioritize general education. Produce a child, produce an 18-year-old who's skilled and ready, then that should be our priority. Then they can look after their higher education. Of course, state should fund higher education, particularly the research-based, more quality higher education, and let the private sector do add-ons. But state we are going for quantity versus quality in higher education. So I think education increases have, in 2019, because of the race, there's a big race for higher education. What happened was the university teachers got a big salary increase, and nothing went for school education. So I think we need to, as I said, increase higher education funding, but we should prioritize general education, because any rupee you spend on general education, the social benefits are much more. Money you spend on higher education, there are social benefits, but the private benefits are more. We can see that.
Sure.
People take a doctorate degree, whatever, they can leave. They can take that and cash that, right? But an educated population, say a generation of educated 18-year-olds, that is a national social benefit, immense benefit. So I think education funding should increase, but we should keep putting more money into general education.
Right. My final question to you with respect to education, the government has indicated that it is going into a system of education reform. Are you satisfied with what is being done? Are all the stakeholders being consulted adequately? Because education reform has been in the cards for a long time. But we still have a generation of kids who are used to memorizing and then rote learning, and it's...
Yep. As I understand, it will be present to the parliament, that's the first place, and publicized. And the thing is, education reforms, most of the things we have been talking about for a long time. So there's really not much to disagree. Maybe in the funding area is where we may have disagreement. If you say that for education, the students, there should be more loans and more, there should be some student contribution, there might be some debate in that. But other than that, how we should have a curricula, how we should teach, how we should assess, there's general agreement. We've been talking about it for so long. So I don't think consultations have been happening right through. So the thing is to bring together in a framework and implement. So I think consultations have been going on long enough. We need to do something. about the reforms.
And finally, any final observations with regard to the budget, Dr. Gamage?
Budget, as I was saying, next year, I really hope to see before the budget, our parliamentarians will get a good analysis in front of them. What was done with the last year's budget, even this icing part, what I'm saying is all these goodies, but not just that, but what we did with the bulk of the funding which goes to the ministries. And it'll be, I don't want to see any of these big news items, but I like to see the parliamentarians sit around in their committees and look at these things in detail. Are these revenue estimates? How can we improve that better? So I think I'm really looking for more analytical, more subdued approach to budgeting, and next year not so much fanfare, but we'll really get down to work and do this boring task of balancing our expenditure with income. And I'm hoping there'll be at least a little bit of surplus so that we start paying our interest, our loans, with money we earn. Right now we are paying back our interest. How do we do that? We borrow more. So we just don't have a surplus from our between our expense. We need a budget surplus to pay off our loans.
Can we get a conversation going on educating parliamentarians themselves on financial literacy?
Actually, I think if you just let it be some sort of a theatre in the parliamentary, the flow of the parliament, they will resort to that. But what I find is actually our parliamentarians, when they sit around in these committee settings, they actually can be quite, they may not have just fancy, they may not know economics, but they bring the, from the ground level realities, and they ask good questions. So I think we need to take the budget debate, really reduce the time on this budget debate in the floor of the parliament, but take it to more committee stage. So there are different committees, they take their allocation and look at it in detail. Parliamentarians behave very differently when they are working in committees. So I think our parliament should go more into working in committees. I think their literacy, actually I think we underestimate our parliamentarians. People say, they don't have education, but I think there was some analysis, maybe 75%, almost all have, completed school education, A-level, and majority has a degree from somewhere. So actually there's a misconception that our parliamentarians are, they're not educated enough. I think we need to change the settings for them. We are the people who are asking the wrong questions, right? So we are the people who are publishing, making, giving for these goodies, giving publicity. If we ask the right questions, actually the thing that parliamentarians do, they don't have to be highly educated. What they do is connect people like us, the policy analyst, with the people. They are the bridge. So I think they ask enough good questions on that.
You said that the people ask the parliamentarians the wrong questions. Dr. Gamage, what questions should we be asking them?
Exactly. I mean, what is you are allocating this much money to Minister of Education? What are you expecting out of that, right? You are allocating so much money to the Minister of Justice. But why do we have to wait for so long for a case to get resolved? Your murder committed in 15-20 years later is only when you get the verdict. So I think those are the kinds of questions we should ask. So
all right, thank you for your time and your perspectives, policy analyst Dr. Sujata Gamage. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good night.